the Valley Society, and I want to welcome you again. I first met Bill as a musician and is delighted. I'm delighted to have him here tonight, sharing another trade and good quality with us. But if you haven't had a chance, check out our website, celticfestival.info, and go and look up Bill's music on YouTube. You will be delighted. So that's number one. Number two, just a little bit about Bill. You probably read about him when you signed up, but he grew up in Scotland and was introduced at a young age to whiskey by his father, and he quickly developed quite an ability to what would you say, have a talent for distinguishing those tastes. He's been doing tasting since 2008, and this is his first virtual tasting with us. So he's going to be doing not only what we call educational background about whiskey and the country, but what we also want to call recreational drinking. So Bill, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Beth. So am I on? Right. So, hey, folks, first of all, welcome. Great to see so many faces. I've never been in one of these before with so many people, so it's a wee bit scary. That's why I drink whiskey. As Beth said, I started drinking whiskey at a young age, and that wasn't to taste malt whiskey. That was for other reasons. That's why all young kids drink whiskey. And as I matured, I developed more of a taste for it, and I discovered that there are so many different whiskies, so many different tastes, and so much history and so many stories that go with the whiskey, that I started doing whiskey tastings. All started one time when I was talking to this bar owner, and I said, "Your whiskey selection's crap." And he said, "Yeah, but I don't know what to buy." I says, "I'll tell you what to buy." And then so he says, "Well, but my customers don't know what to order." And then, so by the end of all that, he had set me up to do whiskey tastings, and that's where it all started. I developed this presentation, and they're really popular live. I hope they go well in this format as well. So I hope you can all hear me. I just want to say also about your whiskey glasses. You know, you see, this is a whiskey tasting glass, and I put out 3 different types. A wine glass is good. Basically, for a tasting, you want something that's concentrating the vapors coming off the whiskey into your nose. Now, the glass tumblers, the whiskey tumblers that you get, are also good because you've got a good surface area, but doesn't concentrate the smell and the aroma and stuff. So these are the ones that I prefer, but you know, I've been known to drink out of anything. So that's the glass. I also talked about getting some water and a tasting, especially if you're not used to whiskey. You can be overcome by the smell of alcohol and not get anything else. A little drop of water. Just keep adding water till it changes and you can smell what you're looking for, or it opens up to other different smells. So that's an important thing. Now, unlike wine, where you sort of stuff your nose in the glass, whiskey tasting, it's nice to introduce yourself to the whiskey. It's hello, how are you doing? Oh, I'm very well, thank you. Oh, you must be a wee cheap Dewars. Yes, I am actually. So you keep taking it away from you, bring it into you. When you sniff, inhale as well through your mouth. You're taking in the smell, the aroma through your nose and your mouth. And again, unlike wine tasting, where I have a friend, Chris Hansey, up in Portland, who's a sommelier, and he can do 1,000 wine tastings in one afternoon up in, you know, on the Columbia River. And he can do that. And the reason he can do that is he can spit it out. And whiskey tasting, you don't do that. One, because we're Scottish and we don't like to waste anything. Two, it's because the taste is in three stages. There's, as you introduce it to yourself, the smell, the aroma. Then there's the palate. Once it's in your mouth, swilling it around and getting what your tongue and the inside of your mouth can get. And then afterwards, there's the finish as you swallow it, and what do you get after you swallow it. And those are three distinct phases where you can actually pick up other flavors that you weren't expecting. There are other things as well about tasting where, you know, you see some of these flowery descriptions like green apples, bubble gum, and it's like you taste the whiskey and it's like, I can never find that. Well, you can if you try. It's like what you want. Once you hear that there's this certain characteristic in a whiskey, you just imagine what that would taste like. Close your eyes and take a taste, and focus in on that one taste, because there's a lot of different tastes going around. But if you focus on one, then you'll get it. Then if you focus on the next one, you'll get that too. And then eventually you get to recognize that whiskey. As soon as you taste it, you know which one it is. So that's just a quick fly through what we're going to do. Did I miss anything? I talked about crackers, cleaning your palate. As you go through multiple whiskies, you know, you might get overpowered with all the whiskies you're having. So just have a drink of water, have a wee cracker or an oat cake if you've got one. I'm sure Dave and Margaret have got them, and that'll see you through. So without further ado, I'm just going to get started. I have a presentation which I've developed over the years, which I think leads us through quite nicely. And so I'll start it up and share it. I can't remember how to do it again. I do the share first, share my screen, and then I click this one here, and then I say share, and I press play. There, can you see it? Thank you, Dorothy. Dorothy's not on mute. She's next door in the kitchen. Right, so the Whiskey Journey by Bill Mullen. So why do we drink whiskey? I think you maybe saw this in the introductory materials. It was studied and studied and studied, and this was the result. This was the result. Are you happy? Yes, have a whiskey. Are you happy? No. Ah, do you want to be happy? Ah, yes, have a whiskey. And if you're not sure, have a whiskey. So all roads lead to whiskey. Whiskey is the great cure-all. So if anybody asks you why you're drinking whiskey, is I want to be happy. Here we go. So we're going to get into Dewar's white label. So I picked Dewar's as that was one of the first whiskies I drank because it was cheap, and it's also been one of the most consistent whiskies. It's a blended whiskey, so it's not a malt whiskey. And by a blended whiskey, it means there are multiple different whiskies in it. So you could say there's, well, I usually ask people, is it less than 10? Is it less than 20? The answer is there's less than 60 whiskies in a Dewar's white label. And it's not a malt whiskey because malt whiskey is malted barley. Dewar's could have wheat whiskey, ryegrass. It can have other grain whiskies mixed into it. And so there's about 50 of them. And with 50 whiskies as its ingredient, I think it's remarkable that all its life it has stayed the same, because I can taste a Dewar's now and it's the same as the Dewar's that my mother was feeding to me in the bottle when I was a wee baby. And anyway, there we go. And also whiskey has also been making its mark by marketing itself, advertising. And here's one that I think is remarkable, because it was made in 1898. It's the very first cinema advertisement that was ever made. It's the first documented one. There was some rivalry between France, some perfume company, but Dewar's is the first authenticated cinema advertisement. The film was made by Thomas Edison, and it was filmed in New York when John Dewar and his compadres went over to market their whiskey over in America.
The first advertising film.
There you go. That was the very first advertisement that was played in the cinema. You had music there, but there was no music on the advertisement. And why did they just jump about? Because they know whiskey logic, you're to be happy. So that was what they were doing. Dewar's has got some great adverts now, and I thought this one could be appreciated too by Ceili of the Valley.
Yours, always you, always true.
So Dewar's, always you, always true there. So Dewar's and whiskey in general has always been into heavy advertisement. I thought that was a cracker, and it was fantastic to see the very first advertisement, and that is John Dewar, who is in that first movie, the guy with the tuxedo. I have no idea who the other ones are. So Dewar's Distillery, it's in Aberfeldy in Perthshire, and it's the whiskey that comes out of that distillery forms about maybe 60% of the total of the whiskey, and the rest is filled in with all the different ones that I mentioned. Again, over 50 different kinds. So let's get into the Dewar's itself. It's just a modest blended whiskey, Dewar's white label, and this is what what Dewar's says about it, what you should be looking for. And again, because it's a blend, don't worry so much if you don't catch everything, because it's quite difficult to get different flavors out of a blend. But let's have a wee taste. Slanjava. So it's definitely grainy. You can get that sort of wheaty, grainy flavor. Roast, I get that. The palate, you know, for a blended whiskey, I never used to drink blended whiskey neat, but it's actually quite nice, and it's quite sweet and malty. And the finish, it's not. I used to be sort of scared of drinking neat blended whiskey, but it's warming. I can taste the vanilla. Peat, I don't get any peat out of it. I can't get that. So, but it's a fine little whiskey, just a simple blended whiskey. And it's good for our first one just to get off, and keeps the price of the tasting down as well. Okay, I can't see any comments because I've only got the presentation in front of me. So you can let me know if you want me to stop and answer anything. Okay, otherwise I'm going to keep going. Whiskey history. I had a huge argument with an Irish friend of mine about where did whiskey come from. And of course, I was saying, the Scots invented whiskey, and he was saying the Irish invented whiskey. And sadly, I had to eventually confess and admit that it was the Irish. The Irish monks. It says in this slide that St. Patrick's credited with doing a lot of things, and generally it was anything the monks did, they said that was St. Patrick. So the monks brought spirit to Ireland, and of course, what did the Irish do? They drank it. It was for medicinal purposes, and that for medicating wounds, for surgeries and things like that. But of course, people discovered you could drink it, and ooh, it was lovely. So that was what happened in the beginning, and then later on, a later stage, the Dalwhinnie Scots took whiskey from Ireland to Scotland. So I had to confess, okay, yeah, you got me. It is Ireland who invented whiskey. However, the story continues. The record is in Scotland of the first time that whiskey was ever discovered to be written down that they were making whiskey, and this one comes from where was it? It's in Fife, in Newborough. It's Lindoris Abbey. At Friar John Core. He was an apothecary, a monk apothecary who was at Lindoris Abbey, and he got 8 balls of malt. This was permission from James IV to brew up aquavita, which, if you go to Lindoris Abbey, which has just opened, the distillery just opened about 2 years ago, it's been totally renovated, and they've brought it back online, and they sell aquavita. So they're going to be selling whiskey as well, but whiskey takes a while before the whiskey is any good, because you can't call a whiskey until it's at least 3 years old. So it's not a great business for cash flow. Anyway, so that was the first recorded time that we saw whiskey appear. And the name, there's lots of different theories on why whiskey is called whiskey, but this is the one I think is probably it, because the name aquavita means water of life, which in Gaelic is uskava. And the more uskava you drink, uski, whiskey. So it's sort of that's one of the theories of how whiskey got called whiskey, and you can see how it broke down, and that one seems the most plausible to me. Uskava, uski. You hear a Scotsman saying uski, whiskey. It's that's what I think it is. So making whiskey. The process here, I'm not going to go through it in great detail. I have something that will do that. The ingredients, there's 3 ingredients. That's barley, yeast, and water. That's it. Three ingredients. And I'm talking about malt whiskey because, as I said earlier, you could have wheat and that'll make a wheat whiskey, but that would never be a malt whiskey. And I'm really going to be talking about malts more. Barley, yeast, and water. That's it. Those are the ingredients. And that's what the barley looks like. So the raw barley is taken and it's soaked, and then it's spread across an iron grill floor, and under which there's a fire, and that fire is drying the barley, but also germinating the seeds, the barley seeds, so that you can see these little sprouts come out, and the best time to stop the seed germinating is when the sprout is the same length as the barley. And at that point, it's got the maximum amount of sugar, because that's what you're looking for, is sugar. And the yeast feeds off the sugar and creates alcohol. So that's what it looks like. And then we go on to the next part of the process: mashing, fermentation, distillation. And I think the best people to talk about that are good friends of Dewar Carries. Over here, Glengoyne. Glengoyne are a sponsor of Dave. Dave plays blues slide guitar, and he's a great guy. And over there in Scotland, does live streams too, and did a Zoom thing the other day. So Glengoyne have been great supporters and great friends of Dave. Let's listen to how they take the process further.
So these guys in the mashing process, they will get the maximum extraction from the sugars, and they would put this liquid, which is called worts, which is very sugary, pump it through into the wash bags, which are fermented, and then we just add 50 kilograms of yeast into 19,000 litres of worts. And the yeast comes from fridge, so it's very cold, it's at 3 degrees. Drop it into a wash bag, and we put it into a liquid which is 18 degrees, and the yeast then adapts to its surroundings and starts taking in the sugars, taking in the carbohydrates, and it starts converting it into alcohol, converting it into carbon dioxide, and eventually it becomes so good, so successful what it does, it actually starts killing itself off because the alcohol becomes so strong at 8%, it just dies away. Now we do this for about 56 hours, and that's important to us, that is key. Any less than that, and you go from one spirit character to another. Any longer, and you can go from one spirit character to another. Less is more of a problem than a long time for Glenfiddich. All the flavours are in the wash bag. So everything's in there. You've got your fruitiness, you've got bubblegum, whatever every distillery wants, it's generally in the wash bag. Now it's what you do in the distillation will magnify them or it'll subdue them. That's where we really start influencing the Glengoyne flavours. We start putting our fingerprint on the product.
There we go, Glengoyne helping us understand the process: mashing, fermentation, distillation, and then maturation. So the whiskey then matures in barrels and is kept in cold, cool warehouses in the dark for years. The longer the better, normally. You also don't want too long, but that's one of the characteristics of malt whiskey, that the longer it's in the barrel, the more it matures and the softer it becomes. The younger whiskies can be fiery. You could taste the fire in the blended whiskey there. In some of the other ones, you won't get that same burn, and that's due to the maturation process. So let's also talk about the casks. So you'll see different terms: single cask, single malt, pure malt. It can be quite confusing. A single cask, like you'll get a Dalwhinnie single cask. So that's one barrel, one cask that came from the Dalwhinnie distillery, and what you get in that cask is just what it was. Nobody has done anything to that whiskey to make it taste like anything else. And it's also a bit of pot luck, because you can get a good one or a bad one. If you get the normal standard ones, which they've taken all these different casks, and they call them the nose, the guy who looks after how should a whiskey taste and how should a whiskey smell. That person makes sure they blend the more expensive, the older whiskies with the younger whiskies to make the whiskey that they want to produce, to have that taste character that they are known for. They want consistency in how the whiskey tastes, because you can't have your Macallan 12-year-old tasting, like one thing one year and then completely different the next. It has to be consistent. So the single malt, that's a mixture of malts. Pure malt can be from different distilleries, and they give it a brand name, but it's not from one distillery. So like a Macallan 12-year-old has only Macallan whiskey in it. 12-year-old means the youngest whiskey in that bottle is 12 years old. If you put an 8-year-old whiskey in, if you mix all that in, you have to call, by law, you have to call that whiskey an 8-year-old whiskey. Or you can decide not to put an age statement on it, which a lot of places are doing because of American whiskey, because of Irish whiskey. They don't have to do that. So to compete in the market, you see a lot of the big names are producing whiskies with no age statement on them. That means it can be anything from 3 years old up. Now, the good thing is that these whiskies, these companies have a reputation to keep. So they're not going to produce a horrible whiskey just to save money. They want to produce something that they can stand behind. So some of the points that I wrote down there: the age statement, the youngest in the malt. Whiskey must be 3 years, I've said that. No age statement, can be 3 years or more. Cask strength, that's just the strength that came out the barrel. If you see a whiskey which is like 40%, that has had water added to it to bring it to that. And most of them do have that. If you have cask strength, you can pour the whiskey and you can drink it. The first thing you'll say, whoa, I need to add water. so that way your cask strength whiskies, you'll always be adding water to them unless you develop a palate for strong whiskies. And then unchill filtered, I mention that because that's a term that you see coming up more and more, that they say it's unchill filtered. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, in the past, they would chill filter whiskey to make it clear. And you could guarantee that that whiskey was always going to be clear because it went through that particular filter. Unchilled filtered, it still has fatty acids in it, which have add their own particular flavour. Personally, I like whiskey that is unchill filtered because it's got a rounder, creamier taste in it. But it's a personal taste. If you see it's unchill filtered, it usually means it got more of a body. If you put water in a whiskey which is unchill filtered, it could become cloudy, and that's normal. That's what happens. That's the fatty acids reacting with the water. So I'm gonna press on, and we're going to get to Jameson. Now here we go. John Jameson. He was born in 1740. And he created Jameson whiskey in 1780, 40 years later. Now, you'd think John Jameson, he's so well known in Ireland, he must be a great, fine Irishman. Well, John Jameson was born in Alloa in Scotland. And he was in the Jameson family. pretty well known. And John Jameson, until he went into whiskey, was a lawyer. And so his education was all in legal stuff. So how does a guy like that get into whiskey? Well, it's always through the female side, isn't it? Margaret Haig is his wife. So he married Margaret Haig, and her brothers were John and James Haig, who run Haig Whisky. And so that's where John Jameson learned about his whisky. It was from the Haigs. And the Jameson family is a well-known family in Scotland, so well so that in the 1600s they were granted their own coat of arms, the Jameson coat of arms, and their motto is Sine Metu, without fear. Now, if you look at that motto, there's the ship on top, there's on a shield, it's got Sine Metu underneath, but in the shield there's the cross, the St Andrew's cross. So on every bottle of Irish Jameson's whiskey, there's the St Andrew's cross in the Jameson logo. So I think that's one for us. And they also use that to their advantage, the Sine Metu, without fear. Here's one of their great adverts.
Nancy says, could you turn up the video?
To most people,
Turn up
the Hawk of Achill was just a legend,
the
except for those who knew better. When it took the Mason's daughter, it was tragic. When it took a barrel of John Jameson's whiskey, well, that was another matter. But Jameson was generous. And the Hawk, greedy. Very greedy. And in the end, the pursuit of the whiskey would prove foolish for the Hawk of Achill.
great. I like that so much, I put in another one.
During the Great Storm of 1781, John Jameson lost a barrel of his beloved whiskey. He said goodbye to the crew and went in after it. In hindsight, that probably wasn't a good idea. Weeks later, a funeral was held. All of Ireland was in attendance, including John Jameson.
I love these adverts. I've turned up the volume on the presentation as far as it can go, so I don't know, Beth, if there's anything else you can do, and hope that helped it a wee bit. So taste number 2, Jameson. Now here we go. Let me talk a wee bit about. Well, let's have a taste, because it's been a while. Let's have a sniff of this now. The orange sherry and the spicy notes. It's a fruitiness I get, and the palate, citric in the mouth. Oiliness, I always get that on any Irish whiskey. There's an Irish whiskey taste which differentiates it. Fudge, vanilla, spice, long warming and spicy as it goes down. Now, if you compare that to the first one, there's a reason why it tastes different. As John Jameson, he was determined to make Irish whiskey different from Scottish whiskey. So he looked for differentiating factors. One of them was adding an E into the name, whiskey. Scottish whiskey is W-H-I-S-K-Y. Irish whiskey is W-H-I-S-K-E-Y. That was John Jameson. He also wanted the smoothest whiskey that you could get. So what he did is he experimented, and he distilled and distilled and distilled the whiskey. He did it up to 20 times to see if he could get the smoothest tasting whiskey he could get. and he discovered that after 3 times, after distilling, putting it 3 times through the distillation process, it didn't get much smoother after that. So that's why just about every Irish whiskey is triple distilled. And 1 or 2 Scottish distilleries do that too, but mostly Scottish whiskey is double distilled twice. The other thing that Jameson wanted, he didn't want any influence. He wanted the raw material to speak for itself. He didn't want any peat. He didn't want any other things in the process. So as he was drying the barley, you know, as the barley was, as I said earlier, was laid out on the floor and people would be turning it over and there would be smoke drying the barley, he dried his in sealed vats so that nothing else could influence it. And these are the things that he put together to make Irish whiskey different from Scottish whiskey. And that was one of his goals. And he knew all about that through his wife's brothers, that he learned how Scottish whiskey is, and he wanted to try to make Irish whiskey different. Pardon me, and he succeeded. He succeeded. So the whiskey regions of Scotland. I'm moving on. I see the time, and we've only had 2 whiskies, and we've got 5 to go, but it picks up pace. Don't worry. So the whiskey regions of Scotland, the blue bit is the islands, the Highlands, you see that, the orange bit, and then Speyside is like a subset of the Highlands, and then you've got the lowlands. There's another region which is not mentioned on this map, and that's the Campbellton region. If you look at that dangly bit on the west coast of Scotland, that's the Kintyre Peninsula, like where Paul McCartney and Wings with these Mull of Kintyre. That's where that was. And Campbellton used to have about 25 different distilleries in there, but I think there's now 3. There was down to just 1, and I think there are 3 now. There's an interesting story that dangly bit there. I was born in 1955, and I grew up in the 60s, you know, the 60s and the 70s, and things were getting a bit risque on television, and censorship was brought in because they were saying there's too much nudity, there's too much flesh on television. We want to censor that. So Mary Whitehouse and her crew of censors who would censor anything that was shown to the British public developed a test called the Kintyre test. And so anything that they saw dangling on a film or a series or whatever, that where the angle was greater than the Kintyre Peninsula, got censored. So that's how that's called the Kintyre test. You can look that up. that's just a freebie. That's nothing to do with whiskey. And so those are the different regions, and you see there all the different distilleries around. Separate map there for Speyside. Now you can see why Speyside is its own category. There are so many there, and I haven't found any of those distilleries who actually make whiskey from the River Spey. It's the Speyside, they're all on the side of the Spey, but just about all of them have a tributary leading into the Spey, and they build their distilleries on the tributary going into the Spey because they want the purest water that's coming in from the Highlands. The water comes from the Highlands, and it's coming over granite, stone, it's coming through heather. There's a lot of filtration, there's minerals. It's very, very pure, and that was one of the reasons up there. Now, Granton-on-Spey, for example, was also a town that was built by soldiers who came back from the Napoleonic War because they had nothing for them to do. So they sent them up to Granton-on-Spey. They built the town, and there were distilleries set up, and there were incentives given for distillery companies to move into that area. So it was sort of promoted as a great whiskey area, and the whiskey is also fantastic that comes out of there. Speyside. Then there's over on the Isles, you can see there's one island that's just full of distilleries. There's 8 distilleries on the Isle of Islay, on the Outer Hebrides there, right at the west side. And I've been there. This is one of the distilleries, and it's a fantastic island. Very peaty, smoky whiskies, but they're all different. They all have their own character, and if you get a chance to go there, it's quite remote, difficult to get to, but well worth the trip. Don't drive when you're there. And so, right, on the tasting, we've done Dewar's, we've done Jameson. So those were the 2 blends. We're now going to be going into the malts: Glenfiddich, Macallan, Dalwhinnie, Oban, and Lagavulin. And the ones I've chosen, in fact, I should have said Glenfiddich 12-year-old. That's mostly what they have. Each distillery company has chosen which is the one that they want to promote, and they have people who protect the taste to make sure that each Macallan 12-year-old, each Dalwhinnie 15-year-old, each Oban 14-year-old tastes the way it's meant to, and that's been in place for years. So that's we're going to move into the malts now. First of all, Glenfiddich. Up there in Speyside, in fact, there you see it there. That's it, Glenfiddich, and it's one of the it's the what do you call it? The green bottle. It's not an expensive whiskey. It's one a lot of people start with, but it's a fine whiskey. It's lovely. It's not got the strength of character that the Islay malts have. It's not a sherry. It's not sherried the way that the Macallan is. It's one that you could take for anywhere with you. It's a very pleasant whiskey. There's a Glenfiddich story which I think is really remarkable.
This is a story of vision, possibilities, and passion. Of William Grant, a man who always remained true to his beliefs and followed his dream of creating the best dram in the valley. And of a family who have spent over 120 years continuing his legacy. William Grant understood the possibilities the land around his hometown offered. In 1886, with just his bare hands and a single stonemason, he began work on his distillery. A year later, with help from his 7 sons and 2 daughters, William Grant's Glenfiddich distillery had risen from the ground. The first drop flowed from the stills on Christmas Day, 1887. The Grant family knew they had something special. A dram the whole world should enjoy. So William's son-in-law, Charles Gordon, embarked on an epic year-long journey from the dusty streets of Lahore to the wetlands of China to find new markets and put Glenfiddich on the map. Today, the 5th generation of the Grant family is still at the helm of the Glenfiddich distillery, and we remain one of the few independent family distillers. William Grant knew that his independence meant he could retain complete control of his whiskey making. And That determination of vision has today led to a unique family of single malts that have been aged to perfection.
Lovely. There we go. So Glenfiddich, this is the picture of their distillery. You see their copper stills, a different shape from other ones that I've seen. You see them taller than that. But then let's get on to taste 3, Glenfiddich. And what is it? It's delicate, floral, slightly fruity. That's what you, that's the smell. For me, it's a sort of fruitiness. And slightly flowery. It's soft, it's rich, it's unassuming. That's what I like about it. Now, I'd like to hark back to what you just saw about them traveling around the world, selling off their whiskey and selling it into all the different places. That became a very, very, very important part of the Scottish whiskey industry, because at the time the Irish whiskey was booming as well. The Irish market was the USA. The Scottish market, with the exception of Campbelltown, which would sell into the USA because it was on the west coast, the rest of the Scottish market found other places to sell their whiskey. And in fact, a lot of it was drunk in Scotland, but because we like it. But that diversification of where do they sell their whiskey stood them in great stead, because in when was it, 1920 to 1933 was American Prohibition, when all alcohol was banned, and then the Irish whiskey industry was flattened because they couldn't sell their whiskey anymore. That was their one market. They were selling big into America. It was even a double whammy. It was even worse than that, because the bootleggers, because people didn't really stop drinking, they just went and did it illegally. The bootleggers up in Canada or in the hills, in Tennessee or wherever they were, they would produce whiskey. And the one that the Americans liked the most was Irish whiskey. So they would put Irish whiskey labels on the bottles of the horrible whiskey they were making. It was like just made. And so people were buying Irish bootleg whiskey, which wasn't Irish whiskey, it was just alcohol. And so not only did Ireland lose its market, it lost its brand, it lost its reputation because of prohibition. And to this day, it's struggling to get back in there again. Now, the Irish whiskey market share in America is about the same as the Scottish malt whiskey market share. But the Scottish whiskey market share is huge, because blended Scottish whiskey sells way more than malt whiskey. So there's a long way to go for Ireland to regain its position, and well, it's quite an interesting story. The Scotland was able to respond and sell its whiskey in other places, and as soon as prohibition stopped, they diverted their supplies and sent them to America, and Scotland dominated the American whiskey industry and still does. So that was how that got there. Okay, Glenfiddich, did you like your Glenfiddich? I'm gonna scoof this one back. A very unassuming, I think a little bit oily is what I get, but it's very smooth. It doesn't burn as it goes down. Macallan was my dad's favourite whiskey, and so we're going to taste the Macallan 12-year-old. It's on Speyside. There it is there, and there are the stills. And Macallan has a name and a reputation which goes far and wide. you will see bottles of Macallan whiskey being sold for fantastic amounts of money, and people say you should invest in whiskies like Macallan. I don't think that would be a great investment for me. I don't think I could stop myself from drinking my investment. But Macallan has a huge reputation, and mostly because of it's stuck with sherry casks. It's a very sherried whiskey. This is our fourth taste. It's Macallan. Let's charge our glasses with the Macallan whiskey. Are we keeping up? Now, the thing about Macallan, you'll see the colour of the whiskey is darker. That's because of the sherry casks. Sherry casks, they come from Spain, and they were in huge supply. And you see a lot of whiskies use, they say, 2 casks, like bourbon and sherry. Now, the main reason for that is sherry casks are very expensive. They can be £3,000 for 1 cask, 3 UK pounds, and that's even more in dollars for a sherry cask. And if you think about it, the whiskey sits in a cask for at least 12 years. So that 3,000 of asset is held for 12 years. Now, after the whiskey has come out, they can reuse these casks, and they do, but the sherry influence is a lot less on the second and the third and the fourth throw. They call it the first throw, second throw, third throw. So they do reuse them. The more expensive Macallans you'll find are first throw casks. The older ones will have been in first throw sherry casks. Now, oh, where's the notes? There they are. Sweet, sherry, toffee, and malt. I can just. My dad used to drink this, and this was my sneaky drink at New Year when he wasn't looking. And later on in the night, even when he was looking, he didn't care anymore. So big-bodied, you can taste it. Compared to the one that we had before, the Glenfiddich, it fills your mouth more. And a tip on tasting again, so when you taste, try and I should have told you this earlier, but the number of years a whiskey is, like, this is 12 years old. A good rule of thumb is when you take a taste of it and it's in your mouth, hold it in your mouth for every second, as long as it's years. So you should hold it in your mouth for 12 seconds, and that way it gets around your tongue, and your tongue, as it gets over the initial shock of alcohol, it begins to taste all the other things that are in there. So the sherry lingers. Orange and oak, I don't really get them. It's the sherry I get, and that's how I tell what it is. And just a wisp of smoke, I can't tell if there's any smoke in it, but I can tell that it's a Macallan from that huge impact of the sherry. Pressing on. See, the thing is, I said this to Beth earlier, that we pick up pace as we go. And so we're going to Dalwhinnie. I've been in this distillery, and it's a beautiful, beautiful distillery. And it's exactly in the middle of nowhere. and it's a factor that you'll find. I just took this off a map. That's where Dalwhinnie Distillery is. It's on the A9 road that goes through Scotland. You'd be driving for miles, and there's nothing there apart from hills and streams and things. Then you see this white dot on the horizon, and that's Dalwhinnie Distillery. Now you could say, well, why would someone build a distillery there in the middle of nowhere? Well, a lot of these distilleries are on the site of where they used to be when they were illicit. So if you want to build an illicit distillery where you don't pay tax, the best place is in the middle of nowhere, which is exactly what they did. However, people like Robert Burns, our national poet, would have caught up with them and would have said, you need to become legal or we're going to fine you. And so eventually they did. And so Dalwhinnie is still in the middle of nowhere, but there's and it's a beautiful distillery. It's just gorgeous. That road there, I've driven up that road, and it really, that's the only thing for miles and miles. And the water, like I said earlier, it comes from these little tributaries into the Spey, and the Spey starts high up. So it comes over the granite. It's very, very pure water. And so how did this work? This is a very old distillery. This is what makes it work. The rail system, that's right beside the distillery. The whiskey goes, the supplies come to the distillery through the railway, and they go out again through the railway. And that was what really had a huge penalty on the lowland whiskey industry. That the quality of these whiskies that were being made up north was fantastic. They were getting subsidies to be up north, and it didn't cost much to be up north where there was nobody. So they had a very cost-effective way of making whiskey and also getting it to the public via the train system. So that was one of the great advantages for Speyside and for the Highland malts. There we go, Dalwhinnie, 15 years. I'm going to get mine going as well. Here's the taste profile. Let's get into this. I hope you're doing okay. You haven't fallen off your chair yet. So Dalwhinnie, it's the reason I put this in the tasting is I love Dalwhinnie. I know Kathy Burns is probably watching this with Steve. This is her favourite whiskey. It's got that aromatic, it's heathery. It's got that heathery taste or its smell that I just love. It's sweet, it's fruity, honeyed. It's got all those lovely things, and it's a very, very very pleasant whiskey. And it says there a subtle note of peat. That's what the distillery says. I don't get any peat off of it. I get the heatheriness, the toffiness of it. It's and it just goes down nicely, leaves a lovely taste in your mouth. I hope you're enjoying your whiskey, Nancy. Okay, there we go. So that's us. We got Dalwhinnie. Now we're going to Oban. So Oban is on the west coast. It's a number 6 whiskey, so we're getting close. I see that the time is 9:31, but we start slow and we finish fast. That's that's the way these things run. And the Oban Distillery is a beautiful place on the west coast. It's the furthest you can go west before you get onto the islands. Well, the west coast, yeah, and that's the view. You can see the distillery chimney there, that red chimney below. This is a view from behind the distillery. And it's as west as you can go. Beautiful place, fantastic scenery. There's the distillery, the Oban Distillery, and behind it they had a renovation where they had to dig into the walls behind it to expand their warehouse so they could hold more barrels. Now, Oban focuses on the 14-year-old. So every barrel is 14 years. So when demand goes up, they need more barrels and they need more space. So they expanded their warehousing into the side of that cliff. That thing behind them is a folly, and there are follies all over Scotland where rich people built them to have impressive buildings. Behind that is really nothing. It was never anything. It's just something that looks impressive, and you see one on the River Tay as you go down from Perth. There's a folly on top of it, which was meant to look like the Lorelei on the Rhine in Germany. The person who built it used to work in Germany and in Scotland, and so he wanted the River Tay to look like the Rhine, so he built a folly on top of it. It's just something that looks like an impressive castle, but there's nothing there. It's just bricks. So while they were renovating, they found the remains of Mesolithic man. This is a little aside, but you'll get why I'm talking about him. Mesolithic man was, oh goodness, where was it? He was first humans thought to have crossed from Scotland in wooden boats to what is now County Antrim around 8000 BC. So Mesolithic man was found there, and so I did more research onto what was happening at those times, if you do believe all that, which I do, and it said that Europe was populated from the east of Scotland, and came through Europe and came into Britain, and then from Scotland they went into Ireland, and Ireland was the last landmass that was populated by Mesolithic man. He was the hunter-gatherer. So what I say to all of that is that the monks, St. Patrick, maybe brought us the spirit, the aqua vita, but we brought the people. They came from Scotland over to Ireland. So I think generally we won. But I thought that's just a fantastic aside, and it was discovered in Oban distillery as they expanded. So now we're moving on to Oban, 14-year-old. Let's crack open that bottle. Run out of space. No, I'm fine, Dor. Okay. So in this case, slightly smoky. It's true. The further west you get, the more smoke you get. Honeyed, floral. Again, this has got the mixture of everything. It's got some of that honeyedness that Dalwhinnie had, but it's getting darker as it gets across to the west coast, to the islands. Cereal, Rice Krispies, a hint of peat, a whiff of the seashore, a little bit. It's not why I would drink Oban. I would drink it because it's got some of that smoke. It's very light, and it's also got that toffee flavour. It's fruity as well. It's nice. It's got that spiciness to it. I thought that one of the earlier ones, what was it, Macallan, was spicier than I remember it as well. But this certainly is getting peppery. Oh, that's lovely. Oh, that's. I'm going to save that one for later. I don't want to be falling off my chair. And the finish is quite lengthy, aromatic. You get that. Spicy oak, toffee, and a touch of new leather. I've never drunk leather, so I don't know if that's right. Hey, but that's what the distillery says it should taste like. So they have people who can taste leather in the finish, and so that's our Oban. We're moving on to our last whiskey, Lagavulin. Lagavulin is one of the distilleries on the Isle of Islay, and it's my favourite whiskey. It's my favourite whiskey on Islay of the smoky ones. Macallan is my favourite whiskey of the Speyside whiskies, but Lagavulin is a magnificent whiskey. There. You can see the Isle of Islay, and you see there's beside Lagavulin there's Laphroaig, then there's Lagavulin, then there's Ardbeg. They're all within staggering distance of each other. I've been there and I've staggered it. And a tip from me, if you do go to Islay, and not to miss a whiskey experience, is the Lagavulin warehouse tour. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, well, 9:30 in the morning. I did it after cutting peat. It was what? 10:30. All right, I started an hour earlier at Laphroaig, cutting peat and drinking whiskey. And then when we got back, we went to the warehouse tour at Lagavulin, and it was fantastic. It was fantastic. The place, they had about 40 people in that warehouse, and they had barrels of whiskey, and they extracted the whiskey from them. And they started with 8-year-old, then 11-year-old. Oh goodness. And then we got a 12-year-old, no, not 11, 12-year-old. Then we got the 16-year-old, then we got 24-year-old, then we got the 30-year-old. And the guy was just pulling whiskey out the barrel and putting it into a bottle and going around and filling it all up. And normally on whiskey tastings, they're a little bit Scottish about the measures. They don't want to be giving you too much. Oh my goodness. I thought that by the time we got to the 30-year-old whiskey, they would be they'd be giving you a lot less because that's the more expensive one. I was wrong. They just kept filling your glass, great shots of whiskey. And who was it? Ian MacArthur. He's a wee man from the island. He's been there all his life, and he's been the warehouse man. He gives the tours now, and he has so many stories. It's just a fantastic tour. If there's any tour you do on Ireland, do that one, the Lagavulin warehouse tour. And here we go. I couldn't resist the little movie here. You hear the wind. That's there all the time. It's the Islay, as you saw, is in the Outer Hebrides. I once traced the line of longitude across to America to find where does it land, and it's on the same line of longitude as halfway up Hudson Bay in Canada, and it's also north enough in Scotland to be north of where Ireland would have sheltered it from the weather coming across the Atlantic. So it gets beaten to death by, you know, real heavy weather coming across the Atlantic. It's one of the first land masses that the weather meets as it comes over the Atlantic. Therefore, they have the most distilleries, because to live there, you need something to cheer you up. And I thought that piece of music was just perfect for Lagavulin, because it's so rugged, so remote. Now the distillery itself has a nice wee story, in that Lagavulin is a village, and in the village of Lagavulin, people used to make their own whiskey illegally, and they had little whiskey stills that they would make. And because they're on the island of Islay, they were mostly left on, you know, left to their own devices. The customs people didn't come very often, and when they did, they could see them coming across and into Port Ellen. It's where they would put their boats. So as soon as they saw the customs people arriving, the villagers would go to the church, and in the church there was a coffin, and in the coffin they would put their stills. So that's where they put their stills. And then when the customs people came, everybody was in the church for a funeral, and so they were all there in the coffin. It was all illicit stills, and they were just there, and so the customs people thought it was strange that they hadn't found any illicit stills. They were suspicious, but they couldn't prove that anybody was doing anything illegal. So they would leave them alone until one time the customs officials were either lying in wait, or one of the parishioners of the church was too eager to get their still out again, and they got caught. And the customs officials said, okay, it's illegal. I could fine you, but I won't fine you. I'll turn a blind eye if you just make it legal. Make it legal, pay your taxes, and I won't fine you. So the villagers then said, well, if we're going to pay taxes, we might as well make a big one. Instead of us each having all our stills, we'll make one big one. And that's what they did. They built this distillery. It was the villagers of Lagavulin that built that distillery, and that's how it was established back in 1816. So that was a wee story I picked up there. So there we go. We're going on to our last taste of Lagavulin, 16-year-old. Now, 16-year, their neighbour Ardbeg, their flagship is Ardbeg 10-year-old. Lagavulin say 16 is that 16 years. That's our taste. It's a wee bit more expensive than Ardbeg, but that's the taste they want to have. They know they'll sell less of it because it's more expensive, but it's worth it because that's what they stand for. And the tasting notes. So the reason that there are so many words in these tasting notes is because there's so much in this. You can taste it in here. As you smell it, the smell that comes over most is the smokiness, the peatiness. It says seaweed. Now next door in Lefroig, they have a very seaweedy, iodine whiskey. This one is not in the same league as far as that medicinal taste goes, but it does have a certain amount of medicinalness in it. The palate The first you get, as it says up there, it says the peat, charcoal, dry woodiness. For me, it's peat. I get the peat. Just it's fruity. Oh, and as it finishes, the smoke comes up again. It's just one of these drinks that you take it. It's got all those flavors, and as you finish it, it's just that smoke. It's like drinking a cigar. That doesn't sound very appetizing, but it certainly is my favorite Islay whiskey. It's just gorgeous, and the finish, quietly spicy. If you are drinking the Lagavulin, it doesn't burn you as it goes down. It's very smooth, very polite. You get the peatiness and the smokiness, but then afterwards, I'm left with a sort of sweet taste in my mouth, like a sort of toffiness, and the flavour of the smoke is still there. It's just a gorgeous whiskey. Okay, it's 10 to 10 in my time, but we've tasted Dewar's. Let me recap. We've tasted Dewar's, very unassuming blend, over 50 different whiskies in that blend. The taste, a cereal taste, is what you'll get most of. Jameson, Irish whiskey, very smooth. Irish whiskies are well worth getting into for their smoothness. What I have to say about Irish whiskies, though, is that it lacks the definition that you have between the Scottish Speyside, the Highland, the West Coast, the islands. There's such a huge variation in taste in the Scottish whiskies. The Irish whiskies, because of that thing that John Jameson did by sealing in just the raw material taste of the barley, there's not much else you can do. You know, if you taste all these different whiskies, they come out quite close to each other. Glenfiddich, very mild-mannered, oily. You can take it anywhere. Everybody will like it. It's a pleasant whiskey. Macallan, 12-year-old, sherried, very sherried, robust, delicious whiskey. Dalwhinnie, flowery, heather, sweet toffee, just a lovely whiskey. You could have it with a dessert. You could have it with Cranachan, a great Scottish dessert. Oban, getting across to the west coast, a little bit smokier, still toffied, still a bit sweet, still a bit heathery, but more darker than the other ones as you go across the west. And then finishing one, Lagavulin, finishing with a strong smoky flavour, but very polite, doesn't burn you, a pleasure to drink, and one that you will go back to a lot once you get a taste for it. I must admit, when I was starting out, I liked Speyside malts, and it's as my palate developed, I got to like the different ones, and I avoided the Islay whiskies because I was bitten by a Lefroy one time at New Year when I bought a bottle of Lefroy and took it home to my dad, and we toasted each other at the crack of midnight. And my dad, who was never known to refuse a drink in any form, he took a drink of the Lefroy, and it was like, he looked at me as his eyes watered, and he says, "Aye, it's an acquired taste, Billy." And he didn't drink it, and it's like he put it aside. I'll drink that later, and the early hours of the morning, I drank it. It's one of these memories, because Lafroig is a real sort of, as I said, seaweedy, salty, smoky whiskey. Lagavulin has lost that roughness. Ardbeg is drier on Islay, and it's just those whiskies all have their own characters, and that's why I love Scottish whiskey. And it also makes me feel happy. So that was the whiskey journey. You may consider yourself introduced. You were probably introduced already, but there we go. Now, if anybody has any questions, any comments, if you want to stay longer, I'm willing to stay longer. If you want to go, that's fine too. I've punished you enough.